He yields back. The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, is now recognized.
I thank the Chair, and I am disappointed that there's been some misinformation coming from the Democrats in this hearing today as we start considering inflation. And the Chair mentioned that there have been wage increases. Yes, there have been wage increases. Fortune magazine, CBS News, CNN all point to wage increases, but they all also point to the fact that the inflation that has been caused by this particular bill that we're discussing about today has eroded and actually basically superseded any kind of wage increase. The only areas where you see that differential is in restaurants and bars and a few other small sectors. And why? Because of the baseline effect. It's the baseline effect that changes this, not the fact that you basically, let's just face it, you haven't taken into account the real impacts of inflation here. And nobody here today has mentioned what inflation does to fixed income families and households. It is devastating to fixed income families and households, of which many are in my district. So I'm kind of surprised that we didn't hear about that. You know, the classical definition of inflation, and quite frankly, Ludwig von Mises said it is the increase in the stock of money. That's it. That's what inflation is. An increase in prices is sometimes an effect of inflation. But when you are a fixed income family, you really get hammered by inflation. So let's get back to this bill for a second. And this is interesting to me because at the start of this bill, you had, and a lot of people have talked about former Obama Chief Economic Advisor Larry Summers, who said they don't need this. The states don't need this. They're going to be fine without this. Jason Furman, also Chairman of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors, told the Washington Post the state fiscal relief total in this bill that we're talking about today exceeds the amount states immediately need. CBO said that already the states had been coming back and GDP had risen and was at a pre-pandemic level by 2021 by the time this bill kicked in. Others, Manhattan Institute, and the reality is this money came out anyway. So let's just talk about this. California had a surprising result. What was their result? A lot of people were able to work from home, and the state's coffers were flush. So after we gave them more money, they found themselves, instead of having a $27 billion budget surplus, having a $75 billion budget surplus. Other states, similarly, New Jersey, instead of having a small surplus, went to $7 billion. My home state of Arizona, instead of having a $1 billion surplus, expanded on that and received, I think it was $5 billion from this bill. Texas went from having a very small deficit contextually to having just under a $1 billion surplus. So I guess my question for you, Mr. Jaffe, is this. How many states went from being at budget balance or from a small surplus to having an even bigger surplus through the bailout to states in this bill?
I'd say that the vast majority of states got to a point where they had more money than they needed, or more money than their 2019 baseline suggested that they should expect to have. So I think it's the vast majority.
So, and what was the total amount of impact with those budget surpluses that were given to most states?
Well, again, in 2021, very little of this money was spent. So it's really a long-term issue of over the next 4 or 5 years, how much of this extra money is going to be spent for things that may or may not have anything to do with the pandemic.
And when you put that kind of money without productive or consumption background to it, primarily without production creating it, and you're just flooding the market, if you will, the money market with dollars, federal dollars, what does that do to the value of the dollar?
it's driving it down, and we're seeing that day by day last year and now this year.
Which is another way of saying you got inflation.
Yes.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Expired. The gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Talib.